The first thing I should tell you is that I didn't want to be in that classroom at all. It was the last week of senior year, the kind of week where nothing matters and everyone knows it. We'd already taken our finals that counted. The teachers had stopped pretending we were learning anything. Most of us spent those mornings signing yearbooks and watching the clock crawl toward a summer that felt like the edge of the world, the last summer, before everyone I'd grown up with scattered into colleges and jobs and lives I couldn't picture yet. So when I walked into Mr. Hadley's room that Monday and found a woman sitting at his desk instead, I barely registered it. Substitutes were nothing. They were furniture. You came in, you signed something, you left. But she looked up when I came through the door, and she said my name, not loudly, not like she was taking roll. She just glanced at me, the way you'd glance at someone you'd known a long time, and she said it, the way my grandmother used to say it, soft on the end, like there was more she wanted to add. I stopped for half a second. Then I told myself the office must have given her a seating chart with our pictures on it. Mr. Hadley kept one taped inside his desk drawer. That was all it was. I sat down in the back by the window, where I always sat, and I didn't think about it again until she started taking attendance, and I realized she wasn't reading from anything. She just looked around the room and named us, one by one, never glancing at a sheet, never stumbling. 26 names. She got every one of them right, including the kid who'd transferred in 2 months ago and the girl whose last name nobody could pronounce. She was an older woman, maybe 60, with gray hair pinned back in a way that looked like it took effort, and she wore a cardigan the color of dried moss. Even though it was already hot enough that week that the building's old radiators ticked and pinged with the heat coming through the windows, she had a stillness to her. Most subs fidgeted, shuffled papers, made nervous jokes. She just sat there with her hands folded, watching us with a patience that I'd describe now as the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be, and nowhere else she could go. At the time, I just thought she was tired. The first strange thing happened Monday afternoon. I'd stayed back a minute after the bell because I couldn't find my pen, and she was erasing the board. And without turning around, she said it must be hard, the first spring without my father. I froze with my hand still in my backpack. My dad had died in March. A heart thing, fast, no warning. The kind of thing that hollows out a house and leaves everyone in it, walking around the edges of the hole for months. I hadn't told anyone at school. I'd missed 4 days and come back and said nothing, and the teachers who knew had the decency not to bring it up, and the ones who didn't know just marked me present and moved on. I never said a word about it in that building. But she knew, and she said it so gently, so much like someone offering you a hand up rather than pushing you down, that I just nodded and mumbled something and left. I told myself Mr. Hadley must have left a note. Teachers talked. The office knew. Somebody had told her, and she was just being kind. That held me through Tuesday, even when she did it to other people. She told Katie Reese, who sat 2 rows up from me, that the coast would suit her, that she'd always thought Katie had the look of someone meant to live near water. Katie had told maybe 3 people she was moving to Wilmington after graduation to live with her aunt. It wasn't a secret exactly, but it wasn't something a substitute would know either. Katie laughed it off, a little unsettled, and the woman just smiled and moved on down the aisle. She did it to Marcus Webb, too. Said something about how his hands were made for fixing things, and Marcus's whole family ran an auto shop, and everybody knew he was going straight into it. So that one didn't land as strange. But she was collecting us. I can see that now. She was going row by row, person by person, like she was reading something off us that the rest of us couldn't see. By Wednesday, I'd started asking around. I had this itch in the back of my skull that I couldn't scratch. At lunch, I asked everybody I knew who they had for their fill-in classes, because half the school was running on substitutes that week, with teachers checking out early. Nobody else had her, not one other class. I described the cardigan, the gray hair, the way she knew everything, and people just shrugged. So, during my free period, I went to the front office and I asked the secretary, Mrs. Coyle, who'd worked there since before I was born, which sub-agency they'd gotten the woman in Mr. Hadley's room from, because I wanted to write her a thank you note. That was the lie I went in with, a thank you note. Mrs. Coyle looked at me over her glasses and said Mr. Hadley hadn't requested a substitute. He'd called in sick Monday morning, sure, but the office had just split his classes into the library and study hall because it was the last week and nobody bothered getting subs for the last week. I told her no. There was a woman. She'd been there 3 days. She knew all our names. Mrs. Coyle pulled up something on her computer and frowned and said there was no record of anyone being hired, no name in the system, no agency, nothing. She asked me to describe her again, so I did. The gray hair pinned back, the mossy green cardigan, the stillness, the way she folded her hands, and Mrs. Coyle's face changed. I've thought about that moment, more than almost anything else. From that year, the way the color just drained out of her like water, out of a cracked glass. She got up, without saying anything, and went to a low shelf behind the counter where they kept the old yearbooks, the ones going back decades, the spines all faded and cracked. She crouched down and ran her finger along them and pulled one out. And I watched her flip through it, with her hands shaking just slightly, and then she turned it around and laid it flat on the counter and pointed at the faculty page. And there she was, same face. Same gray hair, only a little less gray. Same cardigan, or one just like it. The photo was small and black and white, but it was unmistakably her. The same patient stillness, even frozen on a page. And underneath the photo was a name I'd never heard, and 2 dates, a birth year and a death year. And the death year was the year before I was born. Mrs. Coyle said her name out loud, very quietly. And then she said that the woman had been an English teacher at the school for almost 30 years, and that she'd died right there in the building during finals week. In the spring, a stroke at her desk after the students had gone home for the day. They'd found her the next morning. Mrs. Coyle had been young then, just starting in the office, and she remembered it. She remembered the cardigan. She said, the woman had been the kind of teacher who knew everything about her students, who could tell you which ones were struggling at home before they ever said a word, who stayed late to talk to the ones who needed it. She'd never married, never had children. The students had been the whole of her. I want to tell you that I ran out of that office and never went back into that classroom. But the truth is, I didn't believe it. Or I wouldn't let myself believe it. I told myself it was a relative, a daughter or a niece, who'd inherited the face and the taste in cardigans, and had somehow wandered into the building, and started teaching out of grief or madness. And the part of my brain that wanted everything to make sense built that story up so fast and so thick that by the time I went to bed Wednesday night, I'd half convinced myself of it. A look-alike. A relative. A coincidence stretched thin enough to walk across. Then Thursday morning, she handed back a quiz. She came down my row setting papers face down on the desks, and she set one in front of me, and when I turned it over, it was a quiz I had never taken. My name was at the top in my own handwriting, which I knew it wasn't, except that it was, except that I had no memory of writing it. The questions were about a book we'd read in the fall. The answers were filled in, all of them in my hand, and they were marked in red, a number at the top, and I'd done well. And above the grade, in handwriting I'd never seen in my life, small and slanted and old-fashioned, there was a note. It said I'd do fine wherever I was going. And then, just below that, smaller still, like an afterthought she couldn't help. Most of you, I looked up, and she was watching me from the front of the room. And she smiled, the saddest smile I think I've ever seen on a human face, if it was a human face, and she didn't say anything. The bell rang a few minutes later. It was the last day. We were all signing each other's yearbooks, and hugging and crying the way you do, and in all the noise of it I lost track of her. When I looked back at the desk, at the front of the room, it was empty. Mr. Hadley's desk, with his picture of his dog and his coffee mug and his stack of ungraded papers. Like she'd never been there at all. The school year ended that afternoon. We walked out into a June that smelled like cut grass and asphalt, and the whole summer ahead of us. And we scattered the way classes do, the way she'd known we would. I didn't think much about the quiz for a few weeks. I had other things. I had a father-shaped hole to keep walking around the edges of, and a summer job, and the long, slow business of getting ready to leave. But here is the thing I can't put down, the thing that's followed me for all the years since. She singled out 4 of us by name that week. 4 of us she stopped and spoke to, gently, in passing, like a nurse moving between beds. Me about my father, Katie Reese about the coast, Marcus Webb about his hands. And last, on Thursday, right at the end, almost under her breath as we were leaving, she'd said one more name. A boy named Daniel Hartley, who sat near the door quiet. The kind of kid you forget is in the room. She'd said his name soft, softer than the others, and there'd been something in her voice when she said it that I didn't understand at the time. Something that sounded, looking back, like an apology. 3 of us made it to summer's end. Katie went to the coast, and she's still there, married now, kids, a life by the water, just like the woman said. Marcus took over the family shop, and his hands fix things to this day, and I got out, went to school, made it wherever I was going. Fine, just like the note said, but Daniel Hartley died that July. A car on a back road late at night, alone, no one else involved, no clear reason for it. He just went off the road, on a stretch he'd driven 100 times. And I think about how she said his name last, and soft, and sorry, like she already knew, like she'd come back to that building one last finals week, not to warn us, but just to look at us, to see which ones she was going to keep and which one she wasn't, and to be gentle about it. Most of you, not all, she'd told us. She'd told us right there in red ink, and we'd all just folded our quizzes into our backpacks and walked out into the sun. I drove past the school a few years ago. It's still there. And I sat in the parking lot for a long time, looking at the windows of that second-floor room. And I thought about going in, about asking Mrs. Coyle if she still remembered, about pulling that yearbook off the low shelf again, just to be sure I hadn't dreamed it. But I didn't, because some part of me is afraid that if I went back during the last week of some school year, in the spring, during finals, I'd find her sitting at that desk again, with her hands folded, waiting, patient, with all the time in the world. And I'm afraid she'd look up and say my name, soft on the end, like there was something more she wanted to add. Our school sat at the dead end of a gravel road, the kind of road that turns to washboard in the dry months and red soup when it rains, and beyond it, there was nothing but the slumped shoulders of the mountains and the black scars where the mines used to be. The town had been dying my whole life. You could watch it go if you sat still long enough. Every year there were fewer kids in the halls, fewer storefronts with their lights on down on Main, more houses with the windows boarded and the porches sagging. By the time I was a senior, we were graduating, maybe 40 kids, and half of them already had 1 foot out the county line, headed anywhere that wasn't here. So the last bell on the last day was supposed to mean something. It was supposed to be the sound of getting out. I'd stayed late to clean out my locker, because I'm the kind of person who can't leave a thing half done, and 4 years of accumulated junk doesn't empty itself. So while everyone else tore out of the parking lot whooping and laying on their horns, I was still in there, working a stuck combination lock and pulling out old gym clothes and notebooks gone soft with age. By the time I finished, it was just me and the janitor, an old man named Derry. Well, everyone just called him Pap. I never knew his real name in all my years there. And the long, empty halls going gold in that late afternoon light that comes slanting through the high windows and lies across the floor like something poured. It was quiet, the way a school is only ever quiet on that one day. A quiet with all the noise drained out of it. And I remember standing there a second with my box of junk, just feeling it, thinking, that's it, that's the last of it. I'm done with this place. The bell rang at 3. The big final bell, the one on the timer, the one that had governed every minute of my life for 4 years. It rang, and the last of the stragglers, a couple teachers, somebody's mom, drifted out, and the doors banged, and then it was just me and Pap and the gold light. I carried my box out to the lot and set it in the trunk, and I was reaching for the driver's door, keys in my hand, when the bell rang again. The same bell. The same long electric drone of it, coming from inside the building, rolling out across the empty parking lot. And I looked at my phone, and it was 3:40. 40 minutes after the day had ended. Which made no sense, because that bell is on a timer, a dumb old machine in a closet somewhere, that doesn't know what day it is, that just fires on a schedule, and the schedule for the last day ended at 3. There was no 3:40 bell. There had never been a 3:40 bell. The day was over. The year was over. I should have just gotten in my car. I want you to understand that I know that now. But I was 18, and I'd been raised to be helpful, and I figured the system had glitched, gone haywire on its last day, and that somebody ought to tell Pap before it started ringing all night and the neighbors complained. So I left my keys in the door, and I went back in. I found him in the main hall, right by the trophy case, standing dead still. He had his head cocked to one side, and he was listening, though the bell had already stopped, listening to the silence. After it, the way you'd listen for a second footstep on the stair when you weren't sure you'd heard the first. I said his name, and he didn't turn right away. When he did turn, his face had something in it I'd never seen on him in 4 years. And Pap was a man I'd seen break up fights and clean up things in that building that would turn your stomach, a man nothing rattled. But he was rattled now. He was gray with it. He asked me quiet if I'd heard it. I said, of course, that's why I came back. The timers broke. It rang at 3:40, and he shook his head, slow, and he said the timer wasn't broke. He said the bell rings twice on the last day, only once every few years, maybe once a decade. He'd been janitor in that building 30 years, and he'd heard it 3 times now, counting this one. And every time it rang twice on the last day, somebody who walked out of that school that afternoon didn't make it home. I laughed. I think I laughed. It came out wrong, thin. I told him that was just a story, the kind of thing old-timers tell, every town's got one. And he looked at me, and he didn't argue, and that was worse than if he had. He just said the first time was 1974, and it was a girl named Sissy Combs who went into the river off the low bridge that same evening. And the second time was 1991, and it was the Mullins boy. And both times the bell had rung twice in an empty building. And both times he'd been standing right about where he was standing now. And both times he'd told himself it was the timer too. Then he said something I've never forgotten. He said, "The building keeps some of them." He said you could feel it on certain afternoons. That the school didn't want to be as empty as the town was making it, that it held on. And then he told me to go straight to my car, not to stop, not to look in any of the classrooms on my way out, to keep my eyes on the doors, and to drive home, and not pull over for anything. Not a deer, not a friend, not a sound. He said it the way you'd give directions to a child you were sending across a frozen lake. Step where I tell you, don't look down. I went. The hall back to the doors felt longer than it had any right to. The gold light gone thicker, more amber, like the air itself was setting up around me. I kept my eyes forward like he said. But you can't undo what you've been told not to do. And as I passed the trophy case, that long glass case full of dusty cups and faded ribbons from teams that hadn't existed in 20 years, I saw my own reflection in the glass, my own face floating there over the trophies. The way you always catch yourself in dark glass when you pass. And behind my face, in the reflection, there was a classroom. There was no classroom behind me. Behind me was the hall, the lockers, the doors. But in the glass, behind my reflected face, I could see into a dark room full of desks. And at the desks there were students, rows of them. Sitting still, hands folded, the way you sit when you're waiting for a teacher to begin. And they were all looking at me, not at the room. At me, at my reflection, their faces turned toward me in the glass, pale and patient and entirely silent, and none of them. I knew every kid in that school, 40 kids. I knew all of them. None of them was anyone who'd been in the building a minute before. None of them was anyone I'd ever seen. And they watched me go past with an attention so total. It made the back of my neck go cold and tight, like the whole dark roomful of them had been waiting just for this, just to see which way I'd turn. I didn't turn. I didn't slow down. I got my eyes back to the doors, and I pushed through them into the real gold light of the real afternoon, and I got in my car, and my hands were shaking so bad. It took me 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. I'd left it hanging in, and I drove. I drove that washboard gravel road faster than I should have. And when it met the county road, I turned for home, and I did not stop. There was a 4-way down by the old tipple where I always stopped, where everybody stopped. And I rolled it without even slowing, eyes straight ahead, because Pap had said don't stop, and some animal part of me had decided to believe him all the way down to the bone. I got home. I went inside. I didn't tell my mother anything. I sat on my bed until it got dark, and then later than dark. And the bell kept ringing in my head. That second bell. The one that shouldn't have rung. The next week I found out a boy from my grade had died that same afternoon. Caleb. He'd wrapped his car around a tree on the county road, a straight stretch he'd driven every day of his life. No rain, no ice, no reason. They put the time of it, between 3:40 and 4. And when I asked around, careful, not saying why, somebody told me Caleb had stayed late that last day too. He'd been in the building when I was. He'd walked out into that same gold light. And I have wondered ever since, and I will wonder until I die, whether he heard it ring the second time the way I did, whether he stopped to listen the way I stopped, whether some old man told him to drive straight home and not look in the glass, or whether there was no one there to tell him, whether he walked out alone into a building that had already decided it was going to keep one of us. And the only difference between Caleb and me is that I had Pap standing by the trophy case, and Caleb had no one. And he looked, and he saw them, and he didn't drive straight home. I left that town that summer, and I have never gone back. The school's closed now. I heard they finally shut it. not enough kids left to fill it, and the building sits out there at the end of that gravel road, with the windows dark and the gold light still pouring in through them every afternoon onto all those empty desks. And sometimes I think about it, sitting there, emptier than ever, the whole town drained away around it. And I think about what Pap said, that it didn't want to be empty, that it held on. And I wonder, on the last warm afternoon of some spring, with no one left to hear it, whether that bell still rings. Once at 3, and then again, into the silence, into the gold and the dust, and the rows of patient watching faces, at 3:40, calling. And I'm so glad, that there's no one left out there to walk back in and answer it. The tradition at our little mountain high school was older than any of us, older than the teachers even, a thing that had just always been done. On the last day of senior year, you brought your yearbook in, and everybody signed everybody's, the whole class, and the rule. And there was a real rule about it, passed down, nobody knew from when, was that you weren't supposed to read yours until you got home. You'd hand it off, and it'd disappear into the crowd, passed hand to hand down the long hall, and people would huddle over it, scribbling, and it'd come back to you, swollen with everyone's ink, and you'd have to carry it home unread. That was the deal. That was how it had always been. There was a sweetness to it. You drove home with this book on the seat beside you, holding everything everyone thought of you, sealed shut, like a present you'd promised not to open early. I got home that last afternoon, and my mother was at work, and the house was empty and warm. And I took the yearbook out to the front porch and sat down on the swing where I'd sat my whole life, with the mountains going blue-green in the late light, and the creek talking to itself down at the bottom of the yard. And I opened it. The first pages were just what you'd expect. Have a great summer. Stay sweet. Don't ever change. The usual handwriting of the usual people. Big loopy letters from the girls. Cramped little scrawls from the boys. Hearts and exclamation points. And inside jokes worn smooth from 4 years of use. I sat there smiling, flipping through, half reading, the way you do, more feeling the warmth of it than taking in the words. It's a good feeling, that. Being held by all those small kindnesses at once. And then I hit a page signed by Daniel Reese. It was a long note. A whole page, warm and easy, the way you write to somebody you've known a long time. He wrote about the good times we'd had. He wrote about fishing trips down at the wide spot below the falls, about a camping weekend up on the ridge when it had rained all night. And we'd laughed about it for years after, about a string of inside jokes that I half remembered the shape of, without being able to catch hold of any one of them, the way you half remember a dream. He wrote like my oldest friend. He signed it with a little drawing of a fish, the way he always. And there my mind stopped, because I caught myself thinking the way he always did. And I didn't have any way he always did anything, because I had never been friends with Daniel Reese. Daniel Reese had drowned in the river the summer before 10th grade. I'd been at the funeral. I remembered his mother in the front pew of the little Baptist church, with her shoulders going up and down, and the closed casket because of what the water does, and standing in the heat in the cemetery after in a borrowed black shirt that was too big for me. I had not been his friend. We'd had a couple classes together, that was all. We'd nodded in the hall. There had been no fishing trips. There had been no rained-out weekend on the ridge. He had been dead for almost 3 years. I sat there with the book open, and my heart going so hard I could feel it in my throat. And I told myself somebody had played a trick, some cruel, stupid joke. Somebody had signed his name as a prank, but it didn't read like a prank. It read like love. It read like somebody remembering. And the handwriting, I didn't know Daniel Reese's handwriting, but it was its own particular hand, careful and a little backward slanting, nothing like the careless scrawls around it. A hand that belonged to one specific person and no one else. I turned the page. Sarah Combs. Sarah had been killed in a wreck our junior year, her and her sister both, out on the 4-lane in the rain. Her note thanked me for sitting with her at lunch all those days, for being there when nobody else would sit with her, for the talks we'd had. I had never once sat with Sarah Combs at lunch. I knew her face from the morning announcements when they'd asked for a moment of silence. Her handwriting was small and neat and round, girlish, dotting the I's with little circles, and it was nothing like Daniel's, and it was nothing like anyone living's. And it was warm. God, it was so warm, thanking me for a kindness I had never done her. And then I understood what I was holding, and I went through the rest of it, with my hands shaking, and the light dying in the yard. They were all there. Every kid we'd lost in 4 years. There were more of them than you'd think a class of 40 could lose. But a mountain town like ours, with its back roads, and its river, and its long winters, and the things that happen to young people who have nowhere to go, we'd lost a lot. There was Takami Frazier, who died our freshman year of something with his heart nobody had known about. There was the Hatfield girl who'd gone out one January night, and they'd found her in the spring. There was a boy whose name I'd half forgotten until I saw it on the page, and it came back like a slap. Page after page, threaded right in between the living, between Stay Sweet and Don't Ever Change. The dead of our class had signed my yearbook, every single one I'd lost in 4 years, each in their own separate hand, each warm, each thanking me, each remembering a friendship that had never happened, fishing trips that never happened, lunches that never happened, whole years of closeness with people I had only ever mourned from a distance, never known, never sat with, never laughed with. They wrote like I had been the best friend each of them ever had, and the thing that frightened me most, sitting there in the dark by then, was not the fear of it. It was that I wanted it to be true. The notes were so kind. They made me feel so loved, so remembered, that some part of me sat there aching to have been the person they wrote to, the friend they thanked. And I had to keep telling myself over and over, you were not, you were not. You stood in the heat at the cemetery. You did not know them. The last page, after all of them, was in a handwriting I didn't recognize at all. Not Daniel's careful backward slant, not Sarah's round little circles, not any of theirs, and not any living hand I knew. It was older somehow. The note was short. It said only, "Don't be a stranger. We'll see you at the reunion." I closed the book. I sat on that porch until full dark and the creek got loud the way it does at night. And then I went inside and put the yearbook on the top shelf of my closet, where I would not have to see it, and I never showed it to anyone, because what would I have said? I half believed by morning that I'd imagined it, that the grief of 4 years had crept up on me on that long, sweet, sad afternoon, and put words on the pages that weren't there. But I never opened the book again to check. Some part of me knew that if I opened it, the notes would still be there in all their separate hands, and I couldn't have borne it. I'm 41 now. I left the mountains that summer, like I'd always meant to, and I built a life in a flat city, far from any river worth the name. And most days I don't think about it at all, but every 10 years the invitation comes, the class reunion, and I have skipped every single one. The 20th, the 30th, I've never gone, I never will. And I'd tell you it's just that I've lost touch, that I've got no reason to drive all those hours back to a town that's mostly gone now. But that's not the truth, and I'll tell you the truth, because there's no one else I've ever been able to tell. The truth is that the invitation always comes, whether I'm still on any list or not. It finds me every time I move, and the envelope is always damp when it arrives, soft and swollen, the way paper gets when it's been wet and dried and wet again. The ink of my address run and feathered at the edges. And every time, when I bring it in from the mailbox and hold it in my hands, it smells like river water, cold and green, and a little bit like something underneath the water that you'd rather not name. I don't open them anymore. I burn them in the kitchen sink and run the tap, and even the smoke smells like the river. The next one comes in 3 years. I've already decided I won't open it, but I'll know it's there in the box before I ever reach inside. The way you know, walking into a quiet house, that someone is sitting in the dark, in the next room, patient, and glad you're finally home and not minding the wait at all. Because they've waited this long already, and they remember all the good times we had, and they'll see me at the reunion, and they don't want me to be a stranger. I drove a school bus for 20 years up in those hills, and I drove it well, and I'm telling you that first, so you know I'm not the kind of man who scares at shadows or misremembers a road. You don't last 20 years on mountain routes if you do. You learn every switchback and washout and blind curve. You learn which bridges to slow for, and which dogs are going to run out at you, and which old men are going to wave, from which porches, and after a while the route lives in your hands and your feet more than your head, and you could drive it in your sleep. And some mornings before the sun was up I damn near did. I knew those roads. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I knew them. The worst route I ever ran in all those years was the end-of-year field trip up to the old state park, the one way up at the top of the mountain, with the abandoned lodge. They ran it every spring, last week of school, a reward for the little ones, the elementary kids. The park itself was fine in the daytime, picnic shelters, and a nature trail, and a pond. But the old lodge up behind it had been closed since before my time, a big stone and timber thing the state built back in the 30s, and then just let go, and the windows were all dark and broken, and the porch had fallen in on one end, and even the teachers kept the kids well clear of it. Nobody liked that lodge. The kids dared each other to run up and touch the door and run back, the way kids do, and the teachers hollered at them, and that was the whole of anyone's business with it. But you could feel it watching the picnic shelters all day. That big dead building, sitting up there in the trees with all its dark windows, the road up was the worst of it. Hadn't been paved since I was a young man. Switchbacks with no guardrail and a long way down on the open side, and the asphalt broken up into gravel and red clay in the bad stretches, and in the spring with the rains it gets slick as grease. I hated taking a load of children up that road, but I did it every year, careful, in low gear, and every year we got up and back fine, and I'd grip that wheel the whole way and not breathe easy till we were back down on the county road. This particular year, and it was near the end, I retired that summer, so this was one of my last. They loaded 30 kids on in the morning. Little ones, third graders I think, all noise and sugar and excitement, the way they get, screaming and laughing, and somebody already crying, and somebody already needing the bathroom before we'd even left the lot. 2 teachers came along to mind them, a young woman and an older one I'd known for years. I did my count getting on. You always count. That's the first thing and the last thing. You count them on and you count them off. 30 kids, 2 teachers. And we pulled out and wound our way up that mountain in the morning light. The kids singing those songs they sing. And we got to the top fine. Got there fine. I want that clear. The trip up was as ordinary as any trip I ever made. It was the coming back I can't explain. It's the coming back I've carried 20 years now and never told a living soul the whole of. We'd spent the day up there, and along about 2 in the afternoon, the teachers got them all rounded up and loaded back on at the trailhead lot, and I did my count same as always. 30 kids, 2 teachers, all aboard. I remember it because the older teacher gave me the thumbs up from the front seat, the way she always did. All here, let's go. And I pulled the door shut and started us down. And the bus felt wrong. I knew it before I knew it, the way you know weather coming. It was too quiet. Now a busload of 30 tired kids coming home from a field trip isn't loud the way they are in the morning. The sugar's worn off, and some of them are asleep, and the rest are wrung out. I knew that quiet. I'd heard it 100 times. But this wasn't that. This was a quiet that 30 children do not make. Not asleep, not awake, not anyway. It was a held quiet. It was the quiet of a held breath. There wasn't even the creak and shift of bodies, the little coughs and whispers, the squeak of a sneaker on the floor. There was nothing but the engine and the gravel under us, and that enormous waiting silence behind my back. I looked up into my big mirror, the wide one over the windshield, that shows you the whole length of the bus that you live in when you drive. That's your eyes in the back of your head. For 20 years. They were all sitting straight up, every one of them. Backs perfectly straight against the seats, not slumped, not leaning, not turned to each other the way kids always are. Facing forward, hands flat on their knees, both hands, palms down, the way you'd make a child sit who was in serious trouble. Except no child sits like that on their own. Not 30 of them, not all at once and all the same. And they were looking at me, not out the windows, not at each other, at the mirror, at my eyes in the mirror, at the back of my head. 30 pairs of eyes all fixed on me, silent still, every face turned exactly the same way, with exactly the same nothing in it. And the 2 teachers, up close to the front, where I could half see them, turned in their seats. They were sitting the very same way, straight up, hands flat, staring forward at me. My voice came out before I'd decided to use it. I called back over my shoulder, loud, the way I always did, asked them, did they have a good day up at the park? It was a thing I said every trip, and every trip, 30 kids would holler back. Yeah, all ragged and overlapping, and somebody'd yell something silly, and they'd all laugh. Not one of them answered. Not one sound. The silence after my voice was worse than the silence before it, because now I'd thrown my words into it, and it had just swallowed them and gone right on. Deeper. And all those eyes stayed on me in the mirror, and the older teacher, the one I'd known for years, the one who'd given me the thumbs up, she just looked at me with her hands flat on her knees, and her face turned forward, and nothing behind her eyes at all. I drove that whole mountain down, with the hair standing up on my arms and the sweat running cold down my back. I want you to understand what that means, to drive that road. Switchbacks, no guardrail, the long drop on the open side, the clay gone slick, with a load of 30 silent staring things behind you, and not knowing what would happen if you stopped, not daring to stop, just keeping it in low gear and my eyes on the road and trying not to look in that mirror. And looking anyway, every few seconds, the way you can't help, and every time the same, 30 children, sitting straight as posts with their hands flat and their eyes on the back of my head. I prayed, I'm not ashamed to say it. I prayed the whole way down that mountain, the only time in 20 years of driving I ever did. And I drove as careful as I have ever done anything in my life, because some animal part of me was certain, dead certain, that whatever was riding behind me was waiting to see, would I get them down, or wouldn't I? I got them down. We came off the gravel onto the county road, and the silence held the whole way in, 20 more minutes of it, and I pulled into the school lot, just like always. And I set the brake, and I opened the door, and I was shaking so bad I had to hold the wheel. And they filed off normal, just like that. The second that door folded open, the spell broke or lifted or whatever it was, and they came up out of those seats, laughing and chattering and shoving the way kids do. Bye, mister. See you. Have a good summer. Thank you for driving us. 30 little voices, all loud and warm and ordinary. Somebody'd lost a shoe. Somebody was crying about something. The older teacher came down the steps and patted my shoulder and said, "Thank you, what a day," and herded them all off toward the school doors. Normal. Every one of them. Like the whole way down the mountain had never happened. I sat there in the empty bus afterward for a long time, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, telling myself I'd nodded off. I'd dreamed it. The road had got to me. Anything. That night, the principal called me at home. He was an apologetic sort of man, and he was sorry to bother me, but he wanted to make sure I'd gotten word, because there'd been some confusion. The field trip, he said, had been canceled that morning. The weather. There'd been a bad forecast for the mountaintop. Ice and fog up high even though it was spring, and they'd made the call early, before the buses even loaded, and the trip was off. The kids never went. They'd had a regular day at school. He was just calling to apologize for the mix-up on the schedule, in case nobody'd told me, in case I'd shown up to drive a route that got scratched. I stood there in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, and I couldn't make my mouth work. I told him I'd driven it. I'd driven the kids up and back. He went quiet and then he said, "Careful, that no." The log showed my bus never left the lot that day. The trip was canceled in the morning, and the bus sat in the lot all day, and the mileage log had it going nowhere. He said it gently, the way you'd talk to a man you were starting to worry about. He said, maybe I had the day mixed up. Maybe I was thinking of last year, but my odometer showed the 100 miles. I went out to the lot the next morning before light, and I checked it, and there it was, the round trip up that mountain and back, 100 miles and some, logged in the numbers, same as my body had logged it in my arms. The logbook in the office said 0, my odometer said 100, and my boots. I'd left them by the back door the night before the way I always did. My boots were red to the laces with that mountain's clay. That particular red clay you only got on that one road in that one place, caked and dried in the treads. The proof of it, right there, drying on my own back step where the principal's phone call couldn't reach it. I never told him about the mirror. I never told anybody, not my wife, not the other drivers, not in 20 years until right now. Telling you, what would I have said? That I drove 30 children that didn't exist down a mountain. The bus never climbed on a trip that never happened, and they sat the whole way with their hands flat on their knees, staring at the back of my head, and not one of them said a word until I opened that door and let them off into the school they'd been in all day. There's no way to say a thing like that and stay a man people will let drive their children. I retired that summer. I'd planned to do another few years, but I hung it up after that, and the new fellow took my routes, and I never went up that mountain again. Not for any reason, and the old lodge can sit up there in the trees with its dark windows till it falls all the way down for all of me. I think about it more now that I'm old. I think about how careful I drove and how I prayed and how some part of me was so sure they were waiting to see would I get them down safe. And I've come to believe, though I can't tell you how I know it, that I did get them down safe, that whatever they were, whoever they were, I brought them home off that mountain the way you're supposed to bring children home, the way I'd brought 10,000 real ones home over 20 years, and that's why they filed off laughing. That's why they thanked me. That mountain road, the lodge, the long drop on the open side. I've wondered if somewhere back in the years, before my time, a bus full of little ones didn't make it down. If somebody didn't get them home. And every spring, on the day they would have gone, they load up again and wait for a careful driver to do the thing that wasn't done. I never asked who I drove down that mountain. I think I always knew I'd rather not be told. But I count them still, in my sleep, the way you do after 20 years. 30 kids, 2 teachers, all aboard. And in the dream I always look up into the big mirror, and they're always sitting straight up with their hands flat on their knees. Everyone facing forward, waiting, patient. And glad, I think. Glad it's me, because I'm the one who knows the road, and I'm the one who'll get them down. Cleaning out lockers on the last day of school is the kind of job nobody wants, and somebody always gets stuck with. And that year, it was me and 2 others. The student council leftovers, going down the senior hall with a trash barrel and a list, checking off numbers, hauling out the gym socks and the moldering binders, and the forgotten lunches that fill a school's lockers like silt fills a creek bed. It's a sad sort of work, the building emptied out and echoing, your footsteps too loud. The gold afternoon light coming in long through the doors at the end of the hall. 4 years compressed into the smell of old paper and someone's left-behind perfume. We'd nearly finished the row, working our way down toward where it ended, and I was the one who found it. The senior hall lockers ran in a numbered row, and that row was supposed to end at 1 to 12. I'd walked past it 1,000 times in 4 years, and never once counted, the way you never count the stairs in your own house. But that afternoon, past 112, where the row should have just stopped at the corner by the water fountain, there was one more. Number 113, and it was wrong in a way that made me stop and stand there a second, before I even understood what I was looking at. The paint was different. All our lockers were that institutional tan, scuffed and chipped, but uniform, repainted who knew how many times over the decades. This one was an older green, a deep dull green, like an old chalkboard, the paint thick and crackled with age, and the metal of it looked heavier somehow. The louvers at the top, a different shape than the rest of the row. It didn't match anything. It was like someone had taken a locker from another building, another decade, and set it in at the end of our row when nobody was looking, and the wall had just grown closed around it. It wasn't on our list. The list ended at 112, and it was locked, not with one of the school's combination locks, but with an old padlock, a real brass one, gone dark with age, hanging from the latch. We got the custodian, not Pap. This was a younger man, new that year, didn't know the building yet. And he came down the hall with his bolt cutters looking put out, muttering about kids who abandon their junk and make extra work. And he set the cutters on the padlock shackle and leaned into them. It took him a while. That lock was harder than it looked, but it finally gave, with a crack like a knuckle popping. And it fell to the floor and lay there, and he swung the door open, and the 3 of us looked inside. There was a backpack hanging on the hook, an old one, canvas, the kind nobody'd carried in decades, with leather buckles instead of zippers and the color all faded out of it. There was a Letterman jacket hung beside it, wool body and leather sleeves, a big chenille letter on the chest in a school color, and a style I didn't recognize, the kind of jacket you see in old photographs of your grandparents' high school. There was a stack of school books on the shelf, and when I reached up and slid one out, the cover was a textbook from no year any of us could place. The edition decades out of date, the kind of math book that teaches you things in ways they don't teach anymore, the pages gone brown and brittle at the edges. And there was a lunch. A paper sack, folded down at the top sitting on the bottom of the locker. And here is the thing that started the cold going up my back. Before I knew any of the rest of it, the lunch hadn't rotted. You'd think a lunch left in a locker would be a horror, black and liquefied, but it wasn't. It was dry. Just dry, the way things get when they sit a very long time somewhere with no moisture at all, the paper sack stiff and pale. And when I made myself open it, there was a sandwich gone hard as a board, and an apple shrunk down to a little brown fist. Dried, not decayed, like the locker had been a tomb in a desert, instead of a hallway in the wet green mountains where nothing stays dry, where mold grows on your shoes if you leave them in the closet too long, taped inside the door, where kids tape pictures of their friends or their favorite band. There was a class schedule, typed on an old typewriter. The letters punched unevenly into the brittle paper, listing classes in an order, and with names of teachers none of us knew. And at the top of it was a boy's name. And taped beside the schedule was a photograph, a real photograph, square with a white border gone yellow, of a boy. He was wearing that Letterman jacket, the very one hanging there beside us. His hair was combed and parted the way they wore it long ago, and he was smiling, a real smile, an easy, happy kid smile, looking right at the camera like the good, and the summer was coming, and he had every reason in the world to be glad. I read his name off the schedule out loud, and I asked the custodian who that was. And the custodian wouldn't look at the locker. I'd noticed it the moment the door swung open, but it took me until then to understand it. He'd cracked the lock and stepped back, and he'd been standing there the whole time looking down the hall, or at the floor, or at us, but never once into that locker, not at the jacket, not at the photo, not at the dried lunch in the dark at the bottom. And when I said the boy's name, he flinched like I'd touched him. He told us, quiet, not looking, that we should put it all back, just like we found it. And I asked him what he meant. Put it back, it's trash, it's somebody's abandoned stuff, that's the whole job. And he shook his head. He said, 113 gets cut open every few years. Somebody new, somebody who doesn't know better, a new custodian, a new principal, a student council kid like me, with a list that doesn't quite reach the corner. Somebody finds it, and figures it's just an abandoned locker, and cuts the lock to clear it out. And every few years it's full again. The same backpack, the same jacket, the same brittle schedule, and the same yellowed photo, and the same dry lunch in its stiff paper sack. They'd cleared it out before, he said. He knew, because the man who'd trained him had told him, the way it gets passed down between the people who keep the building, the things you tell the new fellow, so he doesn't have to learn them the hard way. They'd cleared it and welded it shut. Not just locked, welded, the latch run solid with a torch, so it could never open again. And a few years on it would be standing there with a brass padlock on it, like the weld had never happened. And inside, everything back, the same things, always the same things, set back. Waiting the boy in the photo, he told us, had gone missing inside the school on the last day of classes, a long, long time ago. Decades. The last day, the way it was the last day now. The building emptying out into summer. He'd been there in the morning, and he was gone by the afternoon, and they searched the whole school, and the grounds and the woods behind, and they dragged the pond, and they never found him. Not a trace. A boy doesn't vanish out of a locked building in the middle of the day, but this one had, and the case went cold, and the years went by, and the boy stayed missing, and the only thing of his that was ever left was that locker at the end of the row, his locker 113. That wouldn't stay empty. That kept setting itself back the way you'd set a table for someone you were still expecting. His backpack on the hook, his jacket beside it. His lunch He never got to eat. His schedule for a school year that ended without him. All of it waiting, dry and patient, for a boy who'd gone somewhere in that building on a last day long ago, and was always, the custodian said, the way he said it, making the hall go colder, always just about to come back for his things. We put it back. I'll tell you, we put every bit of it back, exactly as we found it. The jacket on its hook, the books on the shelf, the dried lunch in the bottom, and I taped the schedule and the photo back inside the door, with my hands not quite steady. And the boy in the photo smiled out at me the whole time, easy and happy, glad about a summer he never got. The custodian had a new padlock in his ring of keys, an ordinary one, and he hung it on the latch and clicked it shut. And he didn't say anything else, and he wouldn't look at it even then. He gathered his bolt cutters and went off down the hall faster than a man his age ought to walk, and left me and the other two to finish the row, except the row was finished. 113 was the end of it. There was nothing past the green locker but the corner, and the water fountain, and the long gold light. The others left ahead of me. I stayed a minute, I don't know why. To finish loading the barrel, I told myself. But the truth is, I wanted a last look at it. That wrong green door at the end of the hall, the way you can't help looking at a grave. And then I shouldered the last of it, and started walking out, down the long empty hall toward the doors, and the light, my footsteps too loud, in all that quiet, the whole school holding its breath behind me, the way schools do on the last day. And behind me, back at the corner where 113 stood, I heard a combination lock spinning, slow, deliberate. The click of a dial turning through its numbers, one and then another, the little metallic catch of each one falling into place. Except it wasn't a combination lock. We'd hung a padlock on it, a keyed padlock, no dial at all, and the old lock before that had been a brass padlock too. There was no dial on that locker anywhere, nothing to spin, nothing to click through its numbers. But I heard it just the same, slow and certain in the empty hall behind me. Somebody dialing their way patiently through a combination they remembered, the way you remember the combination to your own locker, your whole life long, the numbers that open the place where you keep your things. Click, click. Somebody dialing their way back in. I didn't turn around. I want you to know I didn't turn around, that I had that much sense, that some animal part of me knew the way the custodian had known not to look. I walked out into the daylight, and I let the door swing shut behind me on that sound, and I drove home, and that was the last day. And I scattered into summer like everyone does. I'm grown now, with kids of my own, about the age that boy was in the photo. The school's still standing, and every few years I think about it, around this time, the last week of classes, when the buildings empty out into the long gold afternoons. I think about some new custodian, some new student council kid, with a list that ends at 112, finding that wrong green door at the end of the senior hall, getting the bolt cutters, figuring it's just somebody's abandoned junk, cutting the lock, swinging it open, and finding it all there waiting, dry and patient. The backpack, the jacket, the lunch he never ate, the boy smiling out of the yellowed photo, glad about the summer, just about to come back for his things. And I wonder if they'll hear it too, walking out, the slow click of a dial that isn't there, turning through its numbers in the empty hall. Somebody remembering the combination. Somebody, after all this time, finally dialing his way back in. After graduation, before anyone had changed out of their gowns, they marched, all 211 of us, out onto the football field and packed us onto the bleachers for the big panoramic photo. You know the kind. The wide one, longer than it is tall, where the camera sits on its tripod down at the bottom, and slowly sweeps across the whole crowd, a slit of a lens crawling from one end to the other to catch everybody in one continuous strip. The photographer was an old man who'd been doing it for years, decades probably, the same fellow who'd shot our parents' classes and their parents before that, and he had it down to a ritual. He got us arranged in our rows, tallest in back, shortest down front, and he climbed up on his little ladder behind the camera and told us all to hold still. Hold still now. Don't move till you hear the click stop, and there was always some joker who'd thought it through. You could, if you were quick, and the camera was sweeping away from you, run behind the whole crowd and pop up at the other end and get in the picture twice. Somebody tried it every year. The old man knew all the tricks and would make us shoot it again. But that year, far as I knew, nobody managed it. We held still in the heat with the sweat running down under our gowns and the lens crept across us. And that was that. And we scattered into the rest of our lives. The prints came in the mail over the summer, rolled up in a long cardboard tube, and my mother thought it was something special and had it framed, a long skinny frame to fit the long skinny photo, and she hung it in the hallway between the bedrooms. And there it stayed, for years. You know how it is with the things on the walls of the house you grow up in. You stop seeing them. They become part of the wall. I walked past that photo 10,000 times, going to and from my room, and never once looked at it. Not really, not the way you look at a thing. It was years later, home from somewhere, a grown person by then, killing a bored afternoon in my parents' empty house, that I stopped in the hall and actually looked at it. I don't know why that day. I stood there picking out faces, finding myself in the third row, finding the people I'd been close to, the ones I'd lost touch with, smiling at the ones who'd gotten fat or famous or dead in the years since. And then, the way you do when you're bored, I started counting. There were 211 of us in the graduating class. I knew that number cold. It was on the program. The principal said it in his speech. 211. The largest class in the school's history. He'd made a thing of it. I counted the faces in the photo and got 230. I figured I'd miscounted. It's a long photo. The faces get small and crowded toward the back. Easy to count somebody twice or skip a row. So I got a pencil and started over, touching the glass under each face as I went. Careful, row by row, end to end. 230. I did it a third time. Slower. 230. 19 more faces than there were graduates. And here's where the afternoon stopped being bored. Because once I knew to look for them, I started to see which ones they were. The extra faces were scattered through the crowd, not bunched up, not all in one place where you'd notice a clump of strangers, but salted in mostly toward the back, in the high rows where the heads get small. And they were kids I didn't know. Now, 211 is a lot of people, and I won't pretend I could name every one of my classmates. But you know your class. You know the faces of your class, even when the names are gone. 4 years of passing the same people in the same halls burns them in. And these faces weren't that. These were faces I had never seen, and there was something off about every one of them. The same off, once I caught it. They were a little gray, a little out of focus. In a photo where everyone else was sharp and sunlit and sweating in the June heat, these ones were soft at the edges, dimmer. Like they were standing in a slightly different light than the rest of us, or behind a thin pane of something, and their caps and gowns. I had to lean in close to the glass to be sure. Their caps and gowns were a slightly older style. The gowns cut a little different. The caps sitting a little different on their heads. The way clothes look in a photograph from before you were born. Almost the same as now, but not. Off by a few years, in a way you feel more than see. I took the photo down off the wall and laid it on the kitchen table under the good light. And I called people, old classmates, the ones I still had numbers for. I described the faces, where they stood, the back rows. Nobody could name them. A couple people humored me and went and found their own copies of the photo and counted, and called me back quieter than they'd been because they got 232, and they couldn't name the extra ones either. One girl I called, who'd been on yearbook and knew everybody, went very quiet on the phone and then said she didn't want to talk about that photo and hung up and never returned my calls after. So I dug up the actual class list. The real one, the official roster, all 211 names in alphabetical order, the one they'd read off at the ceremony. And I sat at that kitchen table with the photo and the list, and I matched them. Face to name, name to face. It took me most of the evening. I found everybody, every name on the list. I found their face in the photo, marked them off. And when I was done, when every one of the 211 was accounted for, there were 19 faces left over. 19 graduates standing in our photo, in their caps and their slightly wrong gowns, gray and soft, and looking out at the camera with the rest of us who were not on the list, who had no names, who had never, as far as anyone I could reach could say, been students at our school at all. It took me a while, and some real effort, to track down a teacher who'd talk about it. Most of the ones I tried wouldn't, or had moved away, or had that same way of going quiet that the yearbook girl had, but I finally found one. Retired by then, an old woman who'd taught at the school most of her life, and I drove out to see her and laid the whole thing in front of her. The photo, the count, the list, the 19. And she looked at it for a long time, and she didn't seem surprised. And that lack of surprise told me more than anything she said after. She told me reluctant, picking her words, that the panoramic always comes back with extras. It always has. For as long as the school had been buying those photos, and that old man with the ladder had shot them for 50 years, and there'd been another before him, every class's photo came back with more faces than there were graduates. Some years a few, some years more. 19 was on the higher side, she said, but not the highest she'd heard of. The teachers knew. The photographers knew. Nobody made a thing of it, because what would you say? And to whom? And besides, the families never counted. The families just framed them and hung them in their hallways and walked past them for years the way my mother and I had. But the old-timers, she said, the ones who'd been around the longest, they had a way of explaining it. And she gave it to me plain, because I'd come all that way and clearly wasn't going to let it go. They were the ones who didn't get to finish, the kids who died before their own graduation. Every school's got them, over enough years. Every school has a list of the ones who didn't make it to the stage. The car wrecks the summer before senior year, the illnesses, the ones who went out one night and didn't come back, the drownings, the accidents, the slow things and the sudden things, all the ways a young person doesn't reach the end of their 4 years. And the old-timers said that those ones, the unfinished ones, they slip into the back row of every class that comes after, walking, in the only way left to them, the stage they never got to walk, standing for the photo they never got to stand for. Year after year, class after class, the same ones, and a few new ones each time, crowding quietly into the high back rows in their out-of-date gowns, gray and soft and patient, to graduate at last with strangers, over and over, because they never got to do it once with their own. I drove home with the photo on the seat beside me, and I didn't put it back on the wall. I told my mother it had gotten a crack in the glass. I couldn't have walked past it every day after that, knowing. knowing that some of the faces in the back of my own graduation photo belonged to kids who died 10, 20, 50 years before I ever set foot in that school, standing in among my living classmates, soft and gray, looking out at the same camera. But I kept it. I couldn't throw it away. It felt wrong, like throwing away a thing that didn't only belong to me, like the 19 had as much claim to it as I did. So it lives in a closet, wrapped in a sheet, and every so often, once a year or so, I take it out and lay it on the table under the good light, and I count. I tell myself I do it to prove I imagined it, that I'll count 211 this time, and laugh, and finally hang it back up. But I never count 211. And here is the thing I have never told anyone. The thing that keeps it wrapped in that sheet in the dark of the closet, instead of on any wall in my house. The first time I counted, all those years ago at my mother's kitchen table, there were 230. The last time I counted, there were 234. I've checked the old classmates' faces, the living ones, the 211 I can name. They're all still there, sharp and sunlit, exactly as they were. Nothing's changed about us. It's only the back rows that change. Only the gray ones, the soft ones, the ones in the old-style gowns. There seem to be a few more of them every year than I remember, from the year before. Crowding a little further down out of the back. Their faces a little clearer each time, as though the longer the photo hangs in the dark of my closet, the more of them find their way into it, drawn to the one person left, who still takes it out and looks, who still counts, who still sees them. And I've started to wonder, lately, when I lay it out under the light and find the number climbed again, whether the ones who join the back row are only ever the long dead, or whether, somewhere in that softening gray crowd that grows a little every year, I might one of these times recognize a face. Someone I knew. Someone from the 211, gone on ahead, slipped quietly back from the bright front rows into the patient gray ones, in a gown gone just slightly out of style, looking out at the camera and at me and waiting for me to count them in. I worked summer maintenance for the school district when I was a young man, and the way it broke down was, the day after the kids let out for the year, my first job each June was to go through the high school alone and shut it down for the break, room by room. You went into every classroom, and you cut the power strips, and you unplugged the things that didn't need to stay plugged. You checked the windows were latched. You emptied what the teachers had left in the mini fridges before it turned. You logged the room and moved on to the next, all the way through a building built for 2,000 students, floor by floor, wing by wing, by yourself. It took the better part of a week, and I'll tell you, that building is a different place empty. People who've only ever been in a school full of kids don't know what I mean. 2,000 young people gone out of a building in a single afternoon leaves behind a silence that isn't like other silence. It has weight to it. It presses on your ears the way deep water presses, a fullness, a pressure. Like the quiet is a substance and you're moving through it. The halls that were a river of noise and bodies 6 hours before go still and long and dim, the light coming gray-green through the wire glass windows, and your own footsteps come back at you off the lockers, louder than they've got any right to. And you find yourself walking softer, and then softer than that, because somewhere in the animal part of your brain, you've decided you don't want to be heard. You don't think it in words. Your body just decides it for you. My first summer, I felt all that, and chalked it up to nerves. A kid alone in a big empty building. Of course it's spooky, and I got through it fine. It was my second summer that the building started using itself around me. The first time, I was working the third floor. the science wing, and from somewhere below and over, down toward the gym, I figured. I heard the squeak of sneakers on a hardwood floor. That particular squeak, you know it, the stutter and chirp of rubber soles cutting on a polished gym floor, and under it, the slow heavy thunk of a basketball being dribbled, bounce and catch, and the echo of it, the way a ball echoes in a big empty gym. Plain as day, and my first thought was just annoyance. Somebody'd let kids in, some summer league thing nobody'd told me about, and now I'd have to go down and shoo them out and lock up after. So I went, down the stairs and along the second-floor hall toward the gym, and the squeaking and the bouncing kept on the whole way, getting no louder, no softer, like it was always one corner ahead of me, and I came to the gym doors, and they were chained and padlocked from the outside, the way we'd left them, because the gym was the first thing we shut down. I put my face to the wire glass, and the gym was dark, the bleachers folded in against the walls, the floor bare and gleaming faintly in the light from the high windows. And there was nobody in it, no ball, nothing, and it was dead silent. The second I'd gotten my face to that glass, the sound had stopped, like it knew I'd arrived. After that it came regular. The cafeteria was the worst for it, because the cafeteria sound was people. I'd be working near it, and hear the murmur of 100 kids at lunch, that big soft roar of a crowd talking all at once that you stop hearing when you're in it, but that you'd know anywhere. And under it the specific clatter of lunch trays being stacked and dropped, the scrape of chairs, a laugh cutting up out of the general noise, somebody calling a name across the room. A whole lunch period, in full swing, behind the cafeteria doors, and I'd push through the doors, and there'd be nothing. The long room, with the tables folded up, and the chairs stacked on them. The steam tables, cold and dark behind their roll-down shutters, the whole space empty and silent, and smelling of bleach. And then, when I'd turned to go, the moment the door swung shut behind me, the murmur would start up again, faint, on the other side of the doors, 100 kids settling back into a lunch they'd never stopped eating. Lockers slammed in halls. I'd just walked and cleared and left silent. I'd be 2 doors down and hear that long, ragged rattle and bang of a passing period, 50 locker doors slamming, and go back, and the hall would be empty, and every locker shut. A toilet would flush in a dark bathroom. A bell would ring, not the real bell. The system was powered down. I'd cut it myself. But the bell would ring somewhere far off in the building. The period bell, and I swear I'd feel the whole place shift like it was about to move. 2,000 kids about to pour into the halls. And then nothing, the silence pressing back in. I finally told the head custodian. He was an older man. Been with the district his whole working life. And I found him in his shop in the basement. And I told him, half expecting him to laugh at me, that I kept hearing the school being used. The gym, the cafeteria, the lockers, the bell. And he didn't laugh. He set down what he was holding, and he nodded. Slow, like I'd told him the date, like I'd told him the most ordinary fact in the world. And then he told me what it was. The way you tell a new man a thing he needs to know to do the job. He said the school remembers the last day. He said a building that holds that many young lives, that many years. 2,000 kids a year for the better part of a century. All that noise, all that wanting and fearing and laughing and racing through the halls. A building soaks it up. Something of it. It gets into the cinder block, and the old wood, and the long worn floors, layer on layer, year on year. And when the building finally goes quiet for the summer, when there's nobody left in it to lay down fresh, it lets some of the old back out, plays it back. Mostly the last day, he said, because the last day is the loudest, the most alive, the most full of leaving, and a building remembers leaving better than anything. He said it, the way another man might explain the boiler or how to bleed the radiators. Just a feature of the place, just something you worked around. And then he told me the trick, and he got serious when he said it, leaned in. The trick, he said, is you don't answer it. You hear the gym, you don't go to the gym. You hear the cafeteria, you let the cafeteria be. You keep your eyes down and your mind on your work, and you let the building play its tape. And it won't bother you, because it's not for you, it's not even aware of you. It's just the place dreaming out loud. But you don't go looking for the sounds. You don't open the door to see. Because, he said, and here he got quieter, one summer there was a man on this crew, years back, and he heard kids laughing in a classroom down an empty hall, a bright, happy sound, kids cutting up the way they do, and he didn't know yet not to look, or he knew and forgot, or he just couldn't help himself the way you can't. And he went to that classroom, and he put his hand on the door, and he opened it to look in. And the head custodian said, the laughing stopped the instant the door cracked, stopped dead, and the man stood there looking into that room for I don't know how long, and when he came out, he wasn't right, wouldn't say what he saw, wouldn't ever say. He finished out that day, pale and shaking, and he turned in his keys at the end of it, and he quit, and he left town that same summer, and nobody on the crew ever heard from him again. The head custodian had been young then, had seen the man come out of that room with his face wrong, and he'd never forgotten it, and that was why he was telling me now, plain, like the date. You do not open the door. You do not look. Whatever's playing the tape doesn't mind you overhearing, but it minds being seen. So I finished out that summer the way he told me. Eyes down, mind on the work. And I bought myself a little radio and clipped it to my belt and kept it on loud. Music, or the ball game, or a man talking, anything. So the building's sounds had to come through mine, so I never had to hear them clean. And it worked, mostly. The gym squeaked, and I turned up the radio. The cafeteria murmured, and I sang along to whatever was playing and kept moving. The lockers slammed behind me, and I did not turn around. Day after day, room after room, I shut that school down, with my eyes on my own hands and my own feet, and the radio talking in my ear. And I never once went looking, and I never once looked. But the last walkthrough, you can't have the radio on. That's the thing. The very last job, the final pass, is you go through the whole building room by room one more time at the end, and you cut every light, and you have to listen as you go. For a running toilet, a left-on fan, anything still drawing power, so the radio has to be off. And you do it at the end of the day with the light failing, working your way through the dark wings toward the front doors and out. And the building's all the way empty by then, fully shut down, nothing left in it that should make a sound. I did the rooms one by one, cutting the lights, the building going dark behind me, wing by wing, as I worked toward the front. And it was quiet. The whole walkthrough, dead quiet, depressing quiet, no gym, no cafeteria, no lockers, like the building had spent itself and gone to sleep. And I let myself believe I'd make it out clean. The last room was a classroom near the front doors, the closest one, the last switch on my list. I went in and crossed to the far wall in the dark, and found the panel and cut the lights. They were already off, but I cut the breaker, the last of it. The whole school dark now behind me from the back wings, all the way to where I stood. And I turned to walk out the door and back to the world and the summer. And behind me, all at once, a whole school full of voices said goodbye. Not down one hall, not in one room. Everywhere. Every classroom and every hall and the gym and the cafeteria and the stairwells, all at once, 2,000 voices, the whole building. Every young voice that place had ever soaked up in all its years, speaking together in one single soft, enormous word, the way a whole class says it back to a teacher at the end of the day. Goodbye, but vast, but everywhere. But all around me and behind me, in the dark of the emptied school, warm and sad and final, a whole century of the last day, saying it at once. And I'll tell you what the head custodian had taught me was the only thing that saved me, because every cell in my body wanted to turn around, to answer it, to say goodbye back, the way you can't help, the way that man years ago couldn't help opening the door. It was so warm. It was so much like being told goodbye by everyone you ever knew. But I kept my eyes down and my feet moving, and I did not turn around. And I walked out of that dark room and down the dark hall to the front doors and out into the last of the daylight, and I pulled the doors shut behind me on all those voices, and I locked them, and I leaned against the wall outside in the warm evening with my heart going and the cicadas roaring in the trees and the ordinary world all around me. And I did not go back in. I worked 2 more summers, and then I found other work. I never told anyone but the head custodian, and he's long gone now. The school's still there. They still send a young person through it alone every June to shut it down, I expect, and I wonder if anyone tells them anymore, the way he told me. Eyes down, radio loud. You don't answer it. You don't go looking. And whatever you do, on the last walkthrough, when you cut the final light and the whole building behind you says goodbye, all at once in 2,000 voices, and it will. You keep walking, and you do not turn around, no matter how much you want to, no matter how kindly they say it, because they say it so kindly. That's the part I've never been able to put down all these years. Not how frightening it was, how kind. Like the building and everyone it ever held was sorry to see me go too. Every year the graduating seniors snuck out to the old lake the night after the last day of school. It was a tradition older than any of us, handed down class to class, the kind of thing the school officially knew nothing about, and unofficially had known about. For 50 years, the teachers and the principal, all having snuck out to that same lake the night after their own last days once upon a time. You went down a logging road that had been forgotten so long the forest had half taken it back. 2 ruts with a green mohawk of weeds growing up the middle, branches scraping both sides of the truck, and it wound back into the hills for a couple miles until it opened out onto a little gravel flat by the water. And there you built your bonfire, and you swam and you drank what somebody'd managed to get hold of, and you stayed out till the sky started going gray. And that was how you marked the end of being a kid. Everybody did it. Your parents had done it. You weren't a real graduate of that school until you'd done it. The summer I went there were maybe 20 of us, give or take, the core of the senior class, the ones who'd grown up together since we were small. It was a warm night, early summer, the lake flat and black, and holding the last light, long after the sky had let it go, the way mountain lakes do. We got the fire roaring on the gravel flat, and somebody had a radio, and somebody had a cooler. And it was, for a couple hours there, exactly the night you want it to be, when you're 18 and just free, all of us laughing and loud, and feeling like the whole world had just swung open in front of us. It was around the fire, before anybody'd gone in the water, that an older cousin of one of the boys told us the rule of the lake. He was maybe 25, this cousin, old enough to seem grown to us, and he'd come along to drive since he had the truck, and he had that way some older country boys have of telling a thing dead serious to see if you'll bite. He said, the locals all knew the rule, the families that had lived up in those hollows for generations, and that we ought to know it too if we were going to swim. The rule was this: you could swim all you liked, but you counted heads going in, and you counted heads coming out, and you never, ever let the count come out higher than it went in. You could come out short. Somebody might still be in the water. Somebody might have wandered off to the trees. Short was fine. Short, you just waited and counted again. But the count must never come out over. Never more coming out than went in. We asked him why, the way you're supposed to, half laughing already. And he looked at the fire and he said, "The lake gives back what it took." He said the lake had taken people over the years. It was deep, deeper than it had any right to be. An old quarry lake, some said, or a sinkhole lake, no proper bottom to it. And it had taken swimmers down over the generations, and not all of them had come back up. And the ones it kept hungry. Hungry to come home. And on a night, when there were enough young people in the water, enough warmth and life and noise to swim toward, one of the ones it kept might slip in among you in the dark, might climb out onto the bank with you, counting on you not to count, counting on the dark and the firelight and the laughing to cover it, so it could walk out with you and go home at last. And the only thing that stopped it, the only thing, was the count. If you counted and you came up over, you knew. And if you knew, you could leave it behind. But if you didn't count, or you counted wrong, or you let it slide, then it walked out with you. And it went home with somebody. We laughed. Of course we laughed. It was a campfire story, the oldest kind, and the cousin told it well, and we gave him that. And then somebody splashed somebody, and the spell broke, and we stripped down to what we'd swim in, and we counted off. 20. I counted 20 myself. We made a thing of it, laughing. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 20. And we went in. And it was the best night of my young life. I mean that. The water was cool and silk black, and the fire threw orange light out across it, and we swam and floated and hollered and dunked each other. 20 kids who'd known each other their whole lives in the last hours, before everything changed, before we scattered to the colleges, and the jobs, and the lives that would carry us apart forever. I floated on my back out where the firelight got thin, and looked up at more stars than I'd ever see again in a city. And I thought, I'll remember this my whole life. And I have, but not for the reason I thought. We started coming out as the fire burned down, and the chill set in, drifting up onto the gravel, 1 and 2 at a time, grabbing towels and shirts, crowding back toward the warmth. And somebody, I think it was the cousin, he'd stayed up by the fire the whole time, hadn't swum. Somebody started the count. Out of habit, half joking, all right, count off, don't let the lake get you. And we counted, dripping and shivering and laughing in the firelight. 21. We laughed, and somebody said, do it again. Somebody'd been counted twice, and we did it again, slower, the cousin pointing at each of us in turn. 21. And the laughing started to thin out, because now people were looking around, counting faces they knew, and the thing was, everybody was accounted for. Every single one of the 20 who'd gone in was there, present, named. You could point at each of them and say their name and their face matched, all 20. And then there was one more. One face at the edge of the group, just back from the fire, where the light got weak, pale and wet, water running down out of dark hair, and smiling at us. A young face around our age that nobody could name, that nobody remembered arriving. That hadn't been at the fire when we built it, hadn't counted off when we went in, hadn't been anywhere, and was now standing on the bank dripping lake water, like the rest of us, smiling, waiting, like it belonged, like it had always been one of us, and was just glad we'd finally noticed. I have tried for years to describe that face, and I can't quite. It was an ordinary face, that's the worst of it, a kid like us. But wet all the way through in a way the rest of us weren't anymore, water still streaming off it, though it had clearly been out of the lake a while. And pale, not white scared pale, but pale, like something that doesn't get the sun, pale like the underside of something. And the smile never moved, never changed, just held, patient and glad, while we stood there in the dying firelight, and the count rang in the air. 20 in, 21 out. The cousin went white. I watched it happen, the color just leaving him. And he didn't yell. He didn't make a show of it. He just said, low and fast and absolutely serious, in a way that cut through everything, "We're leaving right now, everybody to the trucks. Don't run, don't yell, and nobody look back at the water." And the way he said it, the dead flat fear in a grown man's voice, where a minute ago there'd been campfire story playfulness. It put the fear into all of us at once, and we grabbed what we could grab, and we went. Up the gravel flat toward the trucks, fast as you can go without running. The cousin behind us with his arms spread herding us along, saying, "Don't look back, don't look at the water, keep your eyes on the trucks." And I didn't look back at the water, but I'll tell you what I couldn't help, what I did do. As we crowded up the path, I looked sideways, just once, at the extra one moving along with us in the dark, because some part of me had to know, was it still there, was it coming? And it was. Right in among us, keeping pace, wet and pale and smiling, walking to the trucks with the rest of us. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like it was just one more kid going home after a good night at the lake. And its eyes, when I looked, were already on me. Like it had been waiting for me to look, and the smile widened, just a little, glad, "You see me, good you see me." And I jerked my eyes away and got to the trucks, and we piled in, too many to a cab. Kids in the beds, doors slamming, the cousin gunning the engine and swinging us around in the gravel and pointing us back up that dark logging road with the branches clawing the windows. We drove out in a flat panic. Nobody talked. The headlights bounced off the wall of trees on either side, and the ruts threw us around, and the cousin drove too fast for that road, way too fast, and behind us the lake fell away into the dark and was gone. And it was maybe a mile up that road, maybe 2, before anybody could even breathe, before the worst of it started to lift, before somebody in the cab finally said something shaky and somebody else half laughed the strangled way you do when terror starts to let go. We got to where the logging road met the real road, where we'd parked the rest of the cars, and we stopped and got out, and the cousin made us count one more time. Made us. Stood there in the dark with the headlights on us, and pointed at each of us in turn, his hand still not steady, and counted. 20, we were 20 again. Every one of us who'd gone in, all there, named, accounted for. And the extra one, the pale, wet, smiling one, that had walked up the path among us, that I had seen with my own eyes keeping pace in the dark, that had looked at me and been glad I saw it, was gone. Not there, not in the trucks, not on the road, not anywhere. 20 went in. 21 came out of the water, and 20 got to the cars, which meant it got out somewhere on that road. Somewhere in that mile or two of dark between the lake and the cars. The thing that climbed out of the water with us. The thing the lake had kept and finally let go. The thing that was hungry to come home. It got off. It left us. It found what it was looking for, or close enough, and it slipped away into the dark of those hills, and it went home. To somebody's home, because that was the whole of the rule, wasn't it? The part the cousin told us at the fire, and we laughed at. It walks out with you, and it goes home with somebody. We'd done everything right at the end. We'd counted. We'd known. We hadn't looked back at the water. We'd carried it away from the lake, but we hadn't. None of us thought of it. None of us could have. We hadn't kept it from getting off. We just drove it up the road in the dark with us, all of us packed in those trucks. And somewhere along the way it chose. And it left. And it walked to a house in those hollows that had a light on, or a door unlocked, or somebody inside who'd been waiting a long time for someone to come home and wouldn't think to count. We never went back to that lake. Our class was the last to keep the tradition. Far as I know, word got around, the way it does, and the younger classes found other things to do. The cousin moved away that same year, and I heard he never came back to the county, not for funerals, not for anything. And I left too, like we all did, scattered out into our lives, and most days I don't think about it. But some nights I do. I think about that mile of dark road and the moment it must have decided, the moment it slipped off the back of a truck, or out a window, or just stepped sideways out of our little crowd into the trees, and chose a direction, and started walking. And I think about whatever house it walked to that night, the porch light burning, somebody inside. And I have wondered, every year since, all these years, whose house was it? Which light? Who opened a door that night, or woke to a wet sound in the hall, or found in the morning that someone was home who hadn't been home before, pale and patient and smiling, glad to be back at last, and counting on them, the way it counted on us, not to count. I'm a mother, and I want to say that first, because I need you to understand the kind of person I am before I tell you this. I'm not a thrill seeker. I don't watch the scary movies. I don't believe in ghosts, or I didn't, the way you don't believe in a thing you've never had reason to. I'm a practical woman. I work, I raise my girl, I pay the bills, I worry about the ordinary things mothers worry about. Grades, and head colds, and whether she's eating enough vegetables. If you'd told me any of what I'm about to tell you, before it happened to my own child, I'd have smiled and nodded, and thought you were a little touched. So know that. Know that I'm the last person who'd make this up, and the last person who'd have believed it. It was the last day of 4th grade. My daughter, she was 9 that spring, 10 that summer. She'd had a good year, a happy year, and she was the kind of child who came bursting out of those school doors every afternoon, full of everything that had happened. Talking before she even got the car door open, the whole drive home a flood of who said what and what they had for lunch, and what they did at recess. That was my girl, bright and loud and open as a window. So, when I pulled up in the pickup line that last afternoon, and she came out to the car quiet, it stopped me. She walked to the car slow, with her backpack hanging off one shoulder, and she got in and buckled herself without a word, and she sat there looking out the window. And I asked her, was she sad about summer starting, about not seeing her friends, the way kids get on the last day? And she just shook her head a little and didn't answer. And I thought, well, she's tired, it's been a long week, and I pulled out and started home. We were halfway home when she asked me, small, in a small, careful voice that wasn't like her at all, looking down at her hands, she asked me why I'd sent the other lady to walk her to the bus. I told her I didn't know what she meant. I hadn't sent anyone. She didn't even ride the bus. I picked her up every day. She knew that. And she got a little confused looking, a little frustrated the way kids do when the grown-ups won't get something that's obvious to them. And she said, the lady. The nice lady. The one who'd been waiting for her every afternoon that last week at the edge of the playground, who said Mama had sent her to help. I kept my voice easy. I'm proud of that, looking back, that I kept my voice easy, because something had gone cold and tight in my chest. I asked her to tell me about the lady, and she did, in that small voice, the whole drive home, and then sitting in the driveway after, because I couldn't make myself go inside until I'd heard all of it. There'd been a woman, she said, at recess every afternoon that last week of school. A nice woman. The woman stood past the playground, out at the tree line, past the chain-link fence that ran around the far edge of the playground where it backed up to the woods. and the woman knew my daughter's name. Knew it the first day, called her by, said, "Your mama sent me," said she was there to help walk her to the bus when school let out, that mama was busy that week and had asked her to come. And every afternoon, the woman stood there at the tree line and smiled and talked to my girl through the fence, friendly, patient, and every afternoon she asked her the same thing. She asked her to come a little closer. "Just a little closer, sweetheart. It's hard to talk through the fence." There was a gap, my daughter said. A place down at the end where the chain link had pulled loose from the post and you could get through if you wanted, the kind of gap that exists at the edge of every old playground that the kids know about and the teachers mean to fix. And the woman wanted her to come down to the gap, each day a little closer to it, so they could talk easier, so she could help. And my daughter, and I will thank God for this every day I have left to live. My daughter said no, every time. She told me, matter of fact, like she was explaining something simple, that she didn't go closer because the woman never came onto the playground. The woman never crossed the fence, never set foot on the blacktop where the other kids were, never came to where the teachers were. She only ever stood at the tree line, past the fence in the shadow of the woods, and smiled and beckoned and asked her to come to the gap. And my girl, 9 years old, with more sense in her than I think I'd have had at twice her age, had looked at that and thought, a grown-up who really came from mama would just come get me, would come talk to my teacher, wouldn't stand out in the trees and ask me to come to her. So she said no. Every afternoon for a week she said no thank you and backed away and went back to her friends. And the woman just kept smiling and saying, maybe tomorrow, you'll come a little closer. I called the school the second I got her inside and got her settled with the television, and I called from the other room so she wouldn't hear my voice, because by then my voice wouldn't stay steady. I told them everything. A woman at the tree line, all that last week, calling my child by name, claiming I'd sent her, trying to draw her to a gap in the fence. The woman on the phone in the office went quiet and then got very serious and said they'd review the playground cameras right away, that they had cameras covering the whole yard, including the fence line and the woods behind, and that they'd find this woman and they'd have the police on it before the day was out. And I hung up and I sat on the floor of my kitchen and shook. They called me back that evening, and I could tell from the first word that something was wrong, that it wasn't the call I'd braced for. The woman from the office, and she had children of her own, I could hear it. She told me they'd pulled the footage, all of it. Every afternoon that last week, the camera that covered the far fence and the tree line. And they'd watched it, more than once, several of them watching together. The footage showed my daughter standing alone near the fence at the far edge of the playground. Those afternoons, off by herself, away from the other kids. Standing there talking, shaking her head, backing away, and then coming back the next day, and standing in the same spot, and talking again, shaking her head again, backing away again. They could see her mouth moving, see her gesturing, see her doing exactly what she'd told me she'd done. Saying no, politely, the way a well-raised child says no to a grown-up. But there was no woman. There was no one at the tree line. There was no one past the fence. The footage showed the chain link and the gap where it had pulled loose, and beyond it the empty trees, the woods, standing still in the afternoon light. And my daughter, alone, talking and shaking her head and backing away, talking to the empty trees, to nothing the cameras could see. Afternoon after afternoon, a whole week of it, my little girl, standing at the edge of the playground, in plain view of the cameras and the teachers and the other children, having a careful, frightened, polite conversation with something that stood at the tree line and called her by name and wanted her to come to the gap in the fence, and that the cameras could not see at all. The woman on the phone didn't know what to tell me. She kept her voice professional, but I could hear that it had rattled her. All of them, the little group of them in the office, watching a child talk to nothing for a week straight. She said, "Maybe my daughter had an imaginary friend," she said it. The way you say a thing you don't believe to a person you're hoping won't fall apart on the phone. But a child's imaginary friend doesn't know things. It doesn't know your mother's not coming for you that week. It doesn't know to say mama sent me. It doesn't stand always and only past the fence, in the trees, off the camera, and ask every single day for you to come a little closer to the one gap in the fence where no one's watching. That's not a child's invention. That's a strategy. That's patience. That's something that knew exactly what it was doing and had, I have come to believe, done it before. School let out for the summer 2 days later. And I will tell you what I did, and I don't care how it sounds. I kept her home that last day. I called her in sick, though she wasn't, and I kept her right beside me the whole day. And I didn't let her out of my sight because I could not stop thinking about the fact that the woman had said, "Come a little closer each day." A little closer, and that the last day of school is the day everything's loose and chaotic, and the teachers are distracted, and the kids are wild, and a child could slip down to the end of the fence in all that confusion. And no one would notice for a minute, 2 minutes, long enough. Whatever it was had been building toward something, day by day, closer and closer, and I was not going to give it the last day. So I kept her home. And summer came, and the school emptied out, and my girl was safe in the house with me, and the thing at the tree line never got her close enough to that gap. She's older now. She's all right. She doesn't remember it the way I do. Children are merciful that way. The worst things slide off them. She remembers it as the strange week a lady talked to her at recess, and not much more, and I have never told her what the cameras showed. I've never told anyone until now. Why would I? Who'd believe a practical woman who doesn't watch the scary movies? But here is the part I carry. Here is the part that's mine to carry. That I didn't tell the school and couldn't have told them anyway, because it came after. I still drive past that school. It's on my way to plenty of places. I can't avoid it. And most of the year it's full and bright and ordinary. Buses and crossing guards and kids streaming in and out. And it's just the school, just a building. And I drive past it and don't think a thing. But in the summer, when it's empty, when the lot's bare and the doors are shut and the playground sits silent in the heat, with the swings hanging still, sometimes I look. I can't help it. I look across the empty playground to the far fence, to the tree line past it, to the shadow of the woods, where they back up against the chain link. And more than once, more times than I want to admit, there's a figure there, standing at the tree line, past the fence, in the shade of the trees, where it always stood, where the cameras couldn't reach. Just standing. And it's not looking at the playground, not at the empty swings or the silent blacktop. It's looking at the cars, at the road, at the ones driving past. And I have learned not to slow down. I have learned to keep my eyes forward, and my foot steady and drive on by, like I haven't seen it, the way you'd walk past something in the dark, and pretend you didn't notice, so it won't notice you noticed. Because I think it's still patient. I think whatever it is has all the time in the world and know where it needs to be, and I think it didn't get what it wanted that week. And I don't think it forgot. And I think it stands out there, in the summers at the edge of the empty playground, watching the cars go by, watching the road the way you'd watch a door, You knew somebody had to come back through eventually, waiting, smiling, probably. Though I've never let myself slow down enough to see, waiting for my girl to come a little closer, just a little closer, sweetheart, to the gap in the fence. 20 years out from graduation, I got an invitation to a class reunion, and I almost threw it away with the junk mail. It was summer, and I was standing at the kitchen counter, sorting the day's mail into the keep pile and the toss pile, and it was a handsome envelope, heavy paper, my name done in a nice script, and I figured it was somebody selling something. But I opened it, and it was an invitation to a reunion of my graduating class, to be held at the old high school on a date and time given. 8 o'clock on a Saturday evening that summer, and it was signed, in that same nice script, your class committee. The thing that should have stopped me right there, the first wrong thing, was the location. Because the old school had been closed for 10 years by then. The town had built a consolidated school out by the highway and shut the old one down, and it had sat empty ever since. Out at the end of its road, the windows going dark and the parking lot growing weeds up through the cracks. You couldn't hold a reunion there. There was no power, no water, nothing. It was a dead building waiting on either restoration money that would never come or a wrecking crew that hadn't been hired yet. But I'll be honest with you, I didn't think it through. I was 20 years out, sentimental, a little lonely the way you get in middle age, and the idea of seeing the old crowd again, of walking back into that building one more time, it warmed something in me, and I didn't ask the questions I should have. I just marked the date. I drove up that Saturday evening, as the light was going long and gold, the way it does in summer, out the old road to the end where the school sat. And the first thing I saw, coming around the last bend, was the parking lot, and it was full. Full of cars, and as I pulled in and found a spot, I found myself recognizing them. Not knowing them exactly, but half recognizing, the way you do, that's the kind of car so-and-so always drove. There's one like Tommy's old Camaro. There's the kind of truck the Hatfield boys ran. Cars that belonged to a time, my time, parked in rows, in the weedy lot of a school that had been dead 10 years, and the school itself. I sat in my car a second and just looked at it. The windows were lit. Warm and gold. Every window, the whole building glowing from inside like it was alive again. Like the 10 dark years had never happened. Like I'd driven back through them to a night when the school was still the beating heart of the town. I should have felt the wrongness of it. Instead, I felt my throat go tight with something like homecoming, and I got out and walked in. And inside, at first, it was wonderful. I want to be honest about that too, because it's part of what makes it so hard to carry. It was wonderful. The front hall was lit and warm, and I followed the music and the noise down to the gym. And the gym was decorated. The way we used to decorate it for the dances, crepe paper and a banner. And the lights turned down low and a glitter ball turning. And there was music playing, the music from our years, and the floor was full of people. My people. My whole class, it looked like. Everyone I'd grown up with, talking and laughing and dancing, drinks in their hands, and the second I came through the doors, a couple of them turned and saw me, and their faces lit up and they called my name. Hey, look who made it. You came. And I was swept right into it, hugged and clapped on the back, and handed a drink. 20 years melting away in an instant. But there was a thing wrong. And it got into me slow, the way cold water gets into your boot, and it took me a few minutes standing there, in all that warmth and gladness to understand what it was. Nobody had aged everyone. In that room was 18, every single one of them. Not 18, the way you carry your 18-year-old self around inside you, no matter how old you get. Actually 18, in the flesh, smooth-faced and bright-eyed, and precisely as I had last seen them the year we graduated, 20 years before. Not a gray hair in the room, not a line, not a softened jaw, not a thickened middle, none of the gentle wreckage that 20 years lays on a face. They were all young, they were frozen, and I caught my own reflection in the dark glass of a trophy case along the gym wall as I turned, and I was 40 gray, coming in at my temples, the years all over me. And I was the only one, the only aged thing in that whole bright room full of the eternally young. That was the first thing that turned me cold. Standing there with my drink in my hand in the middle of the dance, the cold coming up through me, looking around at all those unchanged faces and just starting to be afraid. I found an old friend. A girl, a woman, she should have been a woman now, named Becca, who'd been close to me senior year. And she was 18 and lovely and glad to see me, and I took her a little aside from the noise. And I asked her, trying to keep it light, who'd put all this together? Who was the committee? Whose idea? Because somebody had to have rented the building, gotten the power back on, decorated, sent the invitations. And I wanted to know who. I wanted something ordinary to hold on to. And Becca smiled at me, the sweetest, warmest, most untroubled smile, and she said nobody organized it. She said it the way you'd tell someone a happy secret. Nobody puts it together, she said. It just happens. Every so often, every few years, the school calls its children home, and we come. She gestured around at the gym, the lights, the music, all our young, dead classmates dancing, and she said it like it was the loveliest thing in the world, like being called home by the old school was a gift, a mercy, something to be glad of. The school calls its children home and we come. I didn't understand yet, or I wouldn't let myself. And Becca, still smiling, still warm, leaned in a little, friendly, curious, the way you'd ask anyone catching up at a reunion, and she asked me, "When did you pass? What was it that took you?" And the floor went out from under me. Because in that one question, I understood the whole of it. All at once, the way you understand a thing you've been refusing to see the second it's finally said, plain. I looked around that bright, warm room at all those young, unchanged faces, and I started, without meaning to count them, to name them. And every single person in that gym was dead. Everyone. Tommy, who'd wrapped his car around a tree on the county road the summer after graduation. The Hatfield girl who'd gone out one winter night and they'd found in the spring. Danny, the overdose, 3 years out. Sarah and her sister, the wreck in the rain hour. No, that was after. That was years after. But still, gone. Mark, the cancer, fast, in his 30s. The Pruitt boy, killed overseas in the war, the flag folding I'd watched his mother accept. Becca herself. Becca, smiling at me, asking me how I'd died. Becca, I suddenly remembered, had passed 8 or 9 years back. Something with her heart. Young, too young, I'd sent flowers. Every face in that room, the whole laughing, dancing crowd of them. All my dead. 2 decades worth of the ones who hadn't made it, the wreck and the overdose, and the cancer and the war, and the long, slow things, and the sudden things. All of them gathered young and glad in the warm gold light of a school that had called its children home, and they thought I was one of them. That was why they were so glad to see me. That was the warmth. The you came, you made it. They thought I'd finally died too, finally joined them, come home at last to the reunion the way they all had, one by one, as the years took them. Becca was asking me how I'd passed because she assumed I had. Because why else would I be there? The only invitations went out to the class. And 20 years on, the class, the part of the class that came to these was the dead. And somehow, by some clerical mercy or error of whatever sends those invitations, one had gone out to me, to the living one, and I had come. I set down my drink. I didn't answer Becca's question. I couldn't have. What was I going to say? I didn't. I'm not. I'm still alive. I'm sorry. I couldn't say any of it. I just set the drink down on a folding table, and I turned and I walked out of that gym through the warm, bright hall, past the trophy case with my one aged face in its dark glass, and out the front doors into the summer night. And I did not run, but I wanted to. Every step I wanted to. And I got to my car and got in, and my hands were shaking too hard to drive for a minute. And behind me, the school stood lit and golden, every window warm, the music still going faint through the walls, full of all my young dead friends dancing. And not one of them, I think, even noticed I'd gone. Or if they did, they thought I'd just stepped out and would be back. Would be back to stay. Soon enough, I drove home. The next morning I half believed I'd dreamed it. But the invitation was still on my counter where I'd left it. The handsome envelope, your class committee, and when I drove out past the old school that afternoon, in the plain light of day, it was dark and dead and empty as it had been for 10 years. Weeds in the lot, windows black, not a car anywhere, and you'd never have known. But the lot, in the daylight, where all those cars had been, the weeds were crushed, flat, pressed down in rows, the way grass lies after something stood on it all night. I saw that, and I drove on, and I haven't gone back. I think I'm the only one, the only living person who ever got one of those invitations and walked back out again. I've thought about it for years now, why the invitation came to me at all, and the only thing I can figure is that the list those things go by isn't a list of the dead, it's a list of the class. All of us, the whole 200-some of us who walked out of that building one June. And it doesn't know, or doesn't care, who's still breathing and who isn't. It just calls the class home every few years, the way Becca said. And the dead come because they can, and the living mostly don't, because the living mostly throw the strange invitation away with the junk mail, or it never reaches them at all. But it reached me, and I came, and I think that means something. I think it means the school knows my name, knows I'm one of its children, and is patient about it, the way that building was always patient, sitting out there at the end of its road through all the dark years waiting. The school's still standing. They never tore it down. The money never came for that either. And I know, the way you know a date you'd rather not, that the next reunion is in 4 years. The class will be called home again. And I expect another handsome envelope will find its way to my counter, my name in that nice script, your class committee, a date and a time, 8 o'clock on a summer evening. And here is the thing I cannot stop turning over, the thing I'll carry until I have my answer one way or the other. I don't know yet whether, when that night comes, I'll be invited as a guest or as one of the class. Because 4 years is a long time, at my age, in my family, with my heart that the doctors started to frown about. And I think about Becca's warm, untroubled smile, and the gold light, and how glad they all were, how genuinely glad, and how it really was wonderful, those first few minutes before I understood. And some nights, God help me, I think it wouldn't be the worst thing, to be called home to a room full of everyone I ever loved, all of us 18 again, the music playing, no one aged a day. Some nights I'm not as afraid of the next invitation as I ought to be. And that, the fact that part of me is already half looking forward to it, already half wants to walk back into that warm gold light and not walk out again. That is the thing that frightens me most of all.